Welcome everyone. Today's podcast is a joint project with us from Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth and Bharat Vatra as we continue to work together to bring some fantastic new content for our listeners. We have Phoebe Sullivan, our projects manager, and from Bharat Vatra, we have Rohit and Ashish. And also our special guest being Bob Blackman, who is the Conservative MP for Harrow East, and also the all-party parliamentary group chairman for British Hindus, where we'll be discussing the future of the UK and India relationship. Our relationship with India has never come at a more important time. The UK-India trade relationship is muted to be worth 23 billion in 2019, and it supports key industries such as technology, life science, and around 500,000 jobs in each other's economies. We've seen the UK move closer to securing a free trade deal with India as International Trade Minister Liz Truss agreed an enhanced trade partnership during a 5-day visit to the country. I will pass over to Bharat Vatra, who will give us a brief overview on what we'll be discussing before passing back to me and Phoebe, who will ask Bob a couple of questions, and then we will have the bulk of the conversation dominated by Bharat Vatra.
Thank you, Sunil. Hi, my name is Ashish Chandorkar. Bharat Varta, which literally means Indian conversations or Indian discussions, focuses on issues of policy, politics, and culture in the Indian context. Mr. Blackman is a great friend of India. He has been talking about issues which concern the India-UK relationships for the last several years. He was a Padmashree recipient in the year 2020 for his work in the field of public affairs. And most recently, in the last few months, he has spoken very vocally about the realities of the Indian farm law context of the discussions which happened in the UK Parliament. We are grateful to have Mr. Blackman today with us on this podcast. Sunil, you want to go with your questions first, and then we'll come back?
Sure. I'll begin with Phoebe, who has the first question for Bob.
Of course. Thank you, Bob. It really is a pleasure to have you on our platform. You regularly back India publicly and have been termed by many, including Ashish just right now, a friend of India. And you're a long-time supporter of Prime Minister Modi. I just wanted to know how you became so involved in such matters and how your relationship with India really began.
Yeah, I suppose my relationship with India began when I was at school, which is a very long time ago, I'm afraid. Because I've lived in Wembley almost all my life, and when I was at school, the first so-called Ugandan Asians arrived in our school, and they were I think they were all quite intimidated by the fact that there was snow on the ground, it was freezing cold, it was pretty horrible weather. And there was these strange people arrived who spoke better English than us, were better educated than we were, even though we were a very good school, and immediately blended in because of their academic capability. And then we learned about their history and where they'd come from and all they'd been through with Idi Amin and so on. And then more and more people arrived, not only from East Africa, but also from the Indian subcontinent directly. And so therefore Wembley became a magnet for large groups of people who are of Indian origin, if we can term it that way. And so I grew up with people from Indian origin. And then ever since I had a fascination with India when, I have to say, when the Beatles started to go to India and learn about meditation and such like, which was, if you remember back, well, you won't remember, but people may remember back in the 1960s, this was unheard of in terms of so I built up a degree of fascination with India during that time when I was a boy, but then obviously during the 1970s grew more and more involved with people from India originally who are still friends today. And therefore, it became just natural as people were around, which I always find quite strange, really, because I've grown up in a multicultural, religious background all my life, so it's just normal For a lot of people in this country, I think they find it quite intimidating at times. But for me, it was just normal. Went off to university, came back, and then got involved in local politics. And of course, the local politics embroidered a whole range of different people from different backgrounds. But it's when I grew, then started to get involved with the politics of India in a big way in the early 1990s, when the Kashmir Pandits were forced out of Jammu and Kashmir in the ethnic cleansing that was taking place in the valley, which was my first experience of people that really had emerged from their homeland. And so I started to speak about, now it's commonplace we speak about the Kashmir Valley, but I was speaking about this back in 1991, and we held a very big conference in Brent Town Hall at the time, biggest conferences have been on this subject, and we had speakers from a wide range of capabilities. So I've always spoken about those things from there. I suppose I got involved with in Brent politics from the middle 1980s with what was then the Brent Hindu Council, which was various different groups of Samajes, and they came together to form Brent Hindu Council, which was the biggest organisation, I think, of Hindu organisations at the time in the country. So I got very heavily involved with them. I was instrumental in seeking out a place for what we now know as Neasden Mandir, but the Swaminarayan Hindu Mission in Neasden, it was actually the third place that we looked at to try and get that in situ. And then when I was leader of the council, obviously we granted planning permission for that, and we witnessed the development of it, the opening of the Mandir. And similarly with Ealing Road Temple, which is a Sanatan temple, bringing together the various different groups from the Hindu sects to celebrate together, which is still not finished. I mean, it still carries on as a work in progress today, but I was instrumental in selling that land as leader of the council to the organisation, Sri Vallabh Nidhi, who then developed the temple. So I guess it's, for me, it's been part of my history, it's part of my involvement. I've always had a view that we should enable people from different religions to celebrate their religion wherever they are. And so I've grown up helping to develop Hindu temples in particular, right across northwest London.
You're the APP chairman of British Hindus.
Yeah.
What are some of the sort of key responsibilities in that role? And also, what do you see as some of the issues British Hindus face currently?
Yeah, well, I think British Hindus are generally very quiet, very unassuming, get on with their lives, get on with their jobs, get on with their education, look after their families, celebrate their religion, of course, but actually don't make any demands. I mean, it's a community in general that just gets on with life. Whereas there are other communities that are actually very demanding and very outspoken about what they want to achieve and why. And so I formed the all-party parliamentary group for British Hindus on the basis that there were groups for every other religion, but not the Hindus. And I felt this was clearly detrimental. So the main aim is to represent Hindus in Parliament and to government, and to act as a channel for their voice, to help organise events in Parliament so that Hindu religion can be celebrated and the history of Hinduism brought to educate both members of Parliament, be they MPs or members of the House of Lords, and also bring the community into Parliament. Because one of the problems, I think, with the Hindu community in particular is it's been a bit standoffish in terms of politics and not really got involved. So there are obviously issues of concern that the religious freedom, the attacks, I'm afraid, on grooming of Hindus, and that sort of activity. Plus, I think there's a growing intolerance. And one of the problems I'm afraid, in the United Kingdom is that the various different religions that there aren't well known and well understood by most people in the UK. I mean, they group everyone together as one big group, whereas they are disparate. And indeed, in Hinduism, of course, there are, as I've said, there are various different sects within Hinduism, which is not understood. And as you probably know, I during my when re-elected in 2019, I took my oath of office on the King James, which incorporates the history of the Jews, the Christian religion, but also had in my other hand, I had a copy of the Gita, because I think that brought together all religions basically together and representing people from a variety of different backgrounds.
Thank you. Speaking of Parliament, we've seen British Indians rising to the top of UK and global business, as well as seeing more British Indians, including Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel, rise to more senior political positions. Is this a growing trend that you've seen since your time as an MP? And what does this mean for, if any, the relationship between the UK and India?
Well, obviously, having more people of Indian origin join Parliament is good news. It's just good news that we've got a mixture of people that represent the various different elements of UK society. But equally, it's having people that have done well in other walks of life, and then have come into Parliament to add their voice to Parliament. And it just demonstrates actually that if you work hard and you get involved in politics is a long game. You know, people think, oh well, I just I'll just apply to be an MP and that's it. And then I'm elected. It is a long game, and I think this is one of the problems that we have in persuading people to join politics, because obviously I don't know an Indian family that doesn't want their children to be doctors, dentists, pharmacists, accountants, lawyers, professionals, or run their own businesses. When they think of politicians, they think perhaps not. And I think that's one of the drawbacks, I think, for the Indian community. They have, in my experience, excelled at education because they understand education is the key to a better life chance. And it's one of those things that I suppose the history of the Indian population in the UK is arriving here with next to nothing, working incredibly hard and wanting the next generation to succeed and be better than they were. I think that to me is one of the things that is absolutely the right sort of approach to coming to a country that was not originally your own, and then integrating and understanding that in order to achieve things, you've got to work hard both in education and in whatever course of career you embark on. So it's good news because they clearly have a lot to offer. And what other party would have the Chancellor and the Home Secretary of Indian origin, and by the way, the Climate Secretary of Indian origin. So we've got a whole range of colleagues now who are bringing to the fore their life experience and their capability. And the good news is, of course, they have contacts in India, and we know that politics in India, is a very different, because it's a huge country with a huge population. In fact, I mean, on my first ever visit to India, I remember going to Delhi and speaking to one of the MPs for Delhi and say, well, how many constituents have you got? And she said 1.5 million. I thought, my goodness me, how do you represent 1.5 million and stay in touch with that range of people? When I said, I've got 75,000, she looked at me and said, well, that's an easy job then, which is kind of not true. But it is, I think, having that experience and joint experience between the two countries is so important.
It's interesting, we were mentioning the cabinet. My question was, how do we reach out and get more Indians to vote Conservative, or at least be vocal about it? I mean, the cabinet is a fantastic example that there are many Indians who are Conservative, but it seems there is a shyness in Indians being more vocal in their support to the Conservative Party. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I have, and I think I get very annoyed by this, because the reality is that when the Ugandan Asians and other Indians from East Africa arrived in this country, it was when Ted Heath, the Conservative Prime Minister, was in power, and he allowed people to arrive here when they couldn't return to India. Nowhere else in the world would accept this influx of people, and so we embraced people. But when they arrived, there was hostility. So it was hostility from, I'm afraid, local members of my party, you know, the Conservative Party, who said, well, yeah, it's all very well, you're coming in, but we don't want you here. And that was true down in Brent. It was true in Leicester. Leicester even worse actually than down in Brent. And so we had problems in that respect. But then the Labour Party put their arms around the community and said, well, what would you like? Would you like a community centre? Would you like this? Would you like various different things? And instead of embracing a community that actually was going to work hard and contribute to our economy, they almost became people that we didn't really want to see, which really annoyed me, as you can tell. We've developed that as time has gone on, because the reality is, if you map out, and this is a key challenge I always put to people, if you map out the Hindu values, the Indian values of looking after the family, standing on your own 2 feet, believing in education, believing in enterprise, believing in the free market, believing in strong defense, strong security, obeying the laws of the country, more likely to be a victim of crime than to be a perpetrator, far more likely, in fact. You map all these values out and they actually fit completely with Conservative values. But unfortunately, we were getting to the point of, yes, you map all these out, people, oh, yes, we agree with that. And then you put Conservative at the top and people go, oh, I'm not sure. And that is because of the experience that families had when they first arrived. And we've had to work very hard, I think, to actually change that view. And I think by the time when David Cameron was leader, he did an awful lot of work going out to meet different communities, which was great. I remember, you know, taking him to various different venues and speaking to different audiences, which was brilliant. Unfortunately, in 2017, we went backwards, but I think in 2019, we took a dramatic leap forward. And I think there were 2 reasons for that. One is that, you know, I and others were reaching out. We were demonstrating that we'd got leaders in the party of Indian origin, but also because Labour had become so hostile to the Indian community. I mean, you know, the motion at the Labour Party conference in September 2019 on India and Jammu Kashmir was I think really done for Labour, and the message went out, I think, very strongly, Labour amongst the Indian community, which gave us an opportunity. Didn't mean to say everyone was going to vote for us. We had to reach out and actually bring people on board, and we did. We haven't seen the stats yet, but I suspect that a large percentage of the Indian community voted Conservative, many of whom will be for the first time. And we are very keen to keep that community on board. I know lots of community leaders who previously had voted Labour all their lives since they'd arrived in this country, now voted Conservative, and I suspect their whole families are converted to that cause. And I think the generations, the newer, younger generations, who've been both born and educated and developed their skills in this country, are far more likely to vote Conservative, possibly, than the older people who have traditionally followed those Labour traditions. And so that vote bank that Labour had built up, I think, has gone. The opportunity now is for us to convince people not to treat people as a vote bank, but as, you know, as a convincing people of the reasons why it's the right thing to do to vote Conservative. And I think we're succeeding in that regard. It does help. Obviously, Boris as Prime Minister has strong links with India anyway, and his brother, of course, was in India as a correspondent for quite a length of time. So from that respect, you know, we've got, I think, strong links there which we can build on. I think there's probably a close personal relationship between Boris Johnson and Sri Narendra Modi. Certainly Priti Patel knows Narendra Modi very well, which does help. And I think that's sort of, these personal links do help when we're coming to trying to develop that relationship.
Thank you, Bob. I'll pass it over now to Ashish and Rohit, who will ask a few questions from the sort of India perspective.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks, Anil and Phoebe. So, Mr. Blackman, my first question was around the broader Indo-UK relationship. You talked about the great interlinkages in your constituency, in your area, and how the relationship has evolved in the UK. But between the two countries, from a foreign relations perspective, how do you assess what's going on right now, and where are the opportunities for the next few years to come?
Well, I think it's fair to say, since over the last 10 years, David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, visited India more often than any other country outside of countries in the European Union. And so he'd been several times. He built up a personal relationship with Narendra Modi, which I think helped tremendously. As I say, I think we went backwards a bit when Theresa May was Prime Minister because she hadn't got that relationship. But Boris has clearly got that relationship back, which is extremely good news. There are strong relations anyway. And the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, was in India in early part of January, very successful visit, but very low key, because it was intended to be the forerunner of Boris Johnson visiting on Republic Day. Sadly, because of COVID, of course, he couldn't go. But that's been delayed till later this month, we understand, and we're waiting to hear the full details of the visit. Priti Patel obviously has strong links there anyway, which is extremely helpful. And indeed, in what we're trying to do with we've left the European Union, and now we're formulating our policies on immigration, on trade, and such like. And I think, as was said earlier, we had Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, there for 5 days, agreeing some of the wherewithal on the trade arrangements. And I suspect that when Boris Johnson goes to India, we'll get multi-billion-pound trade deals announced. We'll also see improvements in cooperation on defence and security, which are vitally important. And also, I think, the immigration routes that we will follow. Because obviously we want in this country to have people who are literally, and India has a very young population, educated, and has fantastic skills in particular areas, which we need in this country. So to give people the opportunity of coming to the UK, either to study or to work, I think is going to be vitally important going forward. I think it was mentioned about areas between our two great countries. Most importantly, India is the third biggest investor, and we are now the sixth biggest investor in India. We were the third biggest investor in India, so we slipped down that league table, and I think we want to be back up there again, following the various different arrangements that are being made by the two governments, and that does mean that we've got to see some opening up of the Indian economy, as well as opening up our capability to take into account what India wants to achieve. And I think there is a great synergy between the two countries. I think that's, and obviously a shared history, which I think has to have a strong reason why we want to encourage that.
Right. So PM Johnson is slated currently to visit India on April 26th, which is also your birthday, right?
It is. So you're very well in tune. Yeah, done your research very well.
So what are your expectations from this trade deal? I mean, you spoke about immigration and defense, but which are the other areas where you see the cooperation can increase and can benefit both the countries?
Well, clearly, I mean, we've just gone through this dreadful pandemic, and India has been at the forefront of manufacturing of vaccines. I mean, clearly, the way I used to work for BT, and one of the things that we did in BT was use call centers in India for a time, and use development of software in India a lot, because there were highly skilled people and a lot of them available, and therefore it was a good news both for India and UK perspective. But it was a bit of offshoring as opposed to actually developing the relationship properly, in my view. So I think from that perspective, we're going to see more of that. The high-tech arrangements, I think, will come to the fore. There will be an issue about, obviously, the Indian government, quite rightly, want to ensure that things are made in India for Indian consumption. So I think we can get that sort of partnership arrangement going using our technology and Indian capability. We want to use the technology in India and technological capability to roll things out in the UK. So I think there's going to be a lot of that sort of activity. We've got to get back to a position whereby the UK is the destination of choice for young Indian students. Because the reality is that, unfortunately, it used to be that we were the first choice, but all this concerns about visas and such like, I'm afraid, has soured the relationship. Although there's no cap on the number of people that can come to the UK for studying, but I think we've got to make better arrangements about people not only studying here but staying in the UK for a reasonable period of time after they've completed studies to work, and therefore when they go back to India, they go back as friends and will have good friends in the UK on whom they can rely. So I think there's a good arrangement there. But you name it, medicines, the pharmaceuticals industry, the high-tech industries, all these areas I think are areas of great opportunity for growth. And we've got to, I mean, the key point here is we've got to wean ourselves off relying on China for technology. I'd far rather, we were relying on technical capability from India than from China. And you've got to have a multiplicity of channels that you can actually buy products from.
Right. And question from me before I hand over to Rohit. How do you see the role of the Indian diaspora itself evolving in terms of their contribution?
Well, obviously, if you look at in every sphere of life, be it medicine, be it accountancy, be it the law, be it now to a degree in politics, we are seeing the Indian diaspora come to the fore. Even though we'll see what the census says about the population in about a year's time. But obviously, we're talking about a population of what, 1.5 million people, growing importance, growing to the top of society, and really making an impact, I think, right across every area that the Indian people get involved in. I think there's a role that has to be rolled out particularly in local politics. I think one of the problems we've experienced, and we've got a lot of very good people in Harrow now, where I'm a member of Parliament, a lot of very good councillors of Indian origin. We've got to get them involved younger because, as I've said, politics is a long game. So the younger you get involved, the better. And also getting involved early so that you understand the work that's involved before you get the glory bits, which is vitally important. And I think we're reaching out to people of all backgrounds in that respect and trying to encourage them to grow and develop. But we're going to see, I think, an explosion of ownership of firms, contribution to the economy, contribution to education, medicine, and such like, in a way that is very, very powerful. And I'm just grateful that people have made this their home, frankly, because it has contributed tremendously to not only to the economy of the country, but I think the betterment of society generally.
Right. Rohit, you have your questions from politics?
Sure. Thanks, Ashish. Hi, Mr. Blackman. Great to have this opportunity to speak to you. So I do follow UK politics quite a bit. And one very interesting fact that struck out to me over the past couple of years has been how, as Harrow East, it's clearly an outlier if you look at all the constituencies in the UK where, like the top 20 constituencies with Asian population, non-white population, I think 19 of them are represented by Labour, and then there's Harrow East. You're clearly an outlier, a trendsetter, I would say. So how did you go about engaging with this population? It has 26% Asian population, I think. So how did you go
No,
about
37%. 37%,
right.
yeah.
So how
Of my
did you go
electorate,
about
anyway.
how did you go about engaging with a population which, as you mentioned, was clearly not receptive initially to the Conservative Party, and there's been like it's a clear outlier, right? Like just one more point, in '97, I think a lot of seats of similar demographics fell to Labour in the landslide, and only Harrow East has come back. And I think some British analysts I know have said that it's actually gone back even more strongly than where it used to be in 1997. So how did you?
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you rightly say, my predecessor, Tony McNulty, was heavily engaged with the Indian population in Harrow East. He was a councillor in Harrow before he became the MP. And so I beat him in 2010. And that was sheer hard work, you know, frankly, it's sheer hard work. You have to, if you want to represent people, you have to put yourself around. I was the London Assembly member for 4 years in Brent and Harrow, but obviously Harrow East was one of the constituencies involved in that. And I used that time, obviously, to get into the various different communities. We've got, you know, both Kenton Temple, Stanmore Temple, who are relatively small temples in Indian terms, but very important. They were always seen as Labour bastions by my predecessors, and I just took the view to say I was going to try and get involved with them, see what help and assistance I could provide. And because I'd got the history in Brent of supporting the Indian community and the Hindu community in particular, I was welcomed. That still didn't really take off. It was sheer hard work during that period to convince people to vote Conservative, and I won with in 2010 3,500 votes majority. Increased that in 2015. Went backwards in 2017 when we had an interesting election, and then, as you say, 2019 a very strong result, particularly based on the local Hindu community. It is a case of I am involved with. I mean, the pandemic has caused all sorts of problems, but I'm involved in every aspect of the community. I go to every function that is around. I was obviously I was one of the first politicians to go to Bhaktivinoda Mandir when it was under threat of closure back in 1986. And I went there, and it was a very small operation at the time. Now it's I've been going there ever since. I was involved in Neeson Temple, you know, so I've been involved in all these temples. And what it helps is when you're then seen as being on side and a friend of the community, people realise that actually there's a reason for supporting you. And I think over the 11 years I've been a member of Parliament, I've demonstrated to the Indian community that I'm very much, one of them, effectively, which is why I think that community in particular backs me so strongly as we go through. But it's a very Harrow East is a melting pot. It's not just one community; it's a whole series of different communities. We've got the only Greek Orthodox church that's been built in the UK in 100 years in the constituency. So there's that element of community. So there's that element of society. There's a strong Jewish community. There's a small but growing Muslim community, but it's various different groups of Muslims. It's not one coherent grouping. And then, of course, you've got the whole variety of different people from Europe. We've got Romanians, 11,000 Romanians live in Harrow East alone. Vote at the moment, but obviously they're an important diaspora that have arrived in Harrow just in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's been one of those areas where people come to and then move on. But I'm glad to say that in general, the Indian population has stayed.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman. So one question the next question I have is some sort of related to what you mentioned in your initial remarks on how various different groups are quite vocal about some of their demands or what they want. I think that sort of connects to the whole recent controversy around the UK parting the Indian farm bills, and that created quite a strong action in India. And you were one of the few MPs who spoke out in favor of these farm bills. So how do you think this interaction between parliaments of one country speaking about events in another country is going to go, especially when there's more and more of diasporas that are moving from country to country? The world population is becoming more globalized, and people do have an interest in different countries. So how do you think, especially because the UK obviously has much more of a diaspora than, say, India, how do you think balance out, and how do you think that will affect?
In the UK, obviously, there are two things that come from this. One is that we as global Britain are reaching out across the world, reuniting with our friends in the Commonwealth, and making sure that we build up our trade relations and international relations right across the world as Britain and the United Kingdom, rather than as part of the European Union. So that's a very important aspect. And obviously we discuss in Parliament things that are going on around the world all the time. Now, I took the view of saying that things that are internal matters for countries such as India are a matter for India to discuss. It's not for us to interfere in India's internal politics. Far from it. In the UK Parliament, and how would we feel if the Indian Parliament started discussing, Scottish independence or something? We'd feel, hang on, wait a minute, what's it to do with you? And so I think we've got to be very cautious about what we do. It clearly does affect the wider diaspora. But when I looked at these farming laws, the things that struck out for me was, for example, that discussions over reform of farming laws have been going on for 20 years without any resolution. Now, at a time when you've got various different poor farmers, and many of the farmers are quite poor, then anything that benefits them has got to be good news. And so having studied the reforms, they to me looked like a very sensible route forward to actually enable farmers to get their produce to market and to cut the middlemen out of controlling the market. And as soon as you say that, then you understand that some people have something to lose, and it's the middlemen that have something to lose, and in my opinion have stirred up the farmers, particularly from the Punjab, to demonstrate against the farming laws. Now, at a time when Prime Minister Modi and the government have then reached out and said, okay, let's sit down and talk about these things. If you've got particular concerns, what are they? Spell them out to us. Instead of having blockades in Delhi and such like, which I don't think do any good. I think they just cause further problems, particularly during the pandemic. Then it didn't seem to me to be very sensible. Unfortunately, in the UK Parliament, and this has to be fully understood by your listeners and viewers, in the UK Parliament, we have a large number of members of Parliament who are hostile towards India. Most of them, I have to say, are on the Labour side, but it's not confined to the Labour side. But most of them are, and 16 members of the shadow team are of Pakistani origin or are Pakistani supporters. And therefore, they will take any action that they can to cause damage to the UK-India relations. I also think that one of the reasons why in the UK Parliament we had so many debates suddenly coming up on the farming laws, on requests on human rights in Kashmir, and several other requests for debates going on, were just at the time when Boris Johnson as Prime Minister was due to be visiting India. And of course, he was going to be the first leader visiting on Republic Day since the pandemic had struck. This was a great opportunity to further UK-India relations. And I'm sure that this was an attempt to try and put the skids under that improved relationship. And I do think that people if they're going to speak about these things, need to be properly informed. And clearly, to me, the farming laws were an advantage to the poor farmers. It's intriguing that only in really 2 states of India have there been demonstrations, large-scale demonstrations. In the rest of the states of India, these farming laws have been accepted. So I think it's a matter for the national government, it's a matter for the state governments to enable produce to come to market in a proper controlled fashion, for the farmers to sell their produce as they choose, rather than being constrained in the way that they were through these quite rich middlemen in terms of that. So I think there's there is that element of what's gone on in Parliament.
In fact, Mr. Blackman, we had done a discussion alongside the CA4C on these issues, and that episode last month, which was specifically aimed at the UK audience, where we could tell them more about these laws. So, and that was quite widely viewed and appreciated. So I think some of the points which you made were definitely covered also in that episode along with Sunil and Phoebe.
Well, I'm sure you could go into a lot of detail about the farming laws, because they are so important to India and to the farmers, and also to people that depend on the food.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman, for that. So I think the last question for me is something on a more personal note. You were awarded the Padmashree last year. So what did that mean to you as a person who's been a long-standing advocate of India-UK ties?
Well, it's a great thrill, a great privilege, and a great shock. In fact, I wasn't expecting, no one had sort of informed me about this until it was announced. So it came as a massive shock. And what I had to do first off was literally to Google the details of who'd been awarded this in the past. And so I'm the first person of non-Indian origin ever to be awarded this great honour, which I was completely taken aback. Obviously delighted, and the only disappointment has been that I haven't been able to go to India to go through the formal ceremony and receive the award because it came just at the start of the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to visit India in the not too distant future and to receive the award from the President of India, which obviously would be a big thrill for me, my family, and everyone involved. I regard it, however, as being an honour for the Indian diaspora in the UK, because the reality, I stand up and speak in their behalf in the UK Parliament, and therefore I think they also are recipients of this honour. Because when you honour someone who speaks on your behalf, you honour everyone, and I think this has been very important in the process. I mean, if someone said, "Did you set out to do this?" No, I didn't set out to achieve honours. I set out to speak up on behalf of my constituents and people that I represent, and so therefore to be honoured in this way is obviously a big thrill. I mean, when Narendra Modi was here back in 2015, wasn't it, at Wembley Stadium, and I had the opportunity of meeting him on a one-to-one basis. So there was only two MPs that got the opportunity for a one-to-one with Narendra Modi. And of course, I've been to India and met him in India, and then also had the pleasure of escorting him around Parliament when he was here, and also seeing him when he's been here for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings. And I hope that I'll get the opportunity to meet him when he's here for the G7 conference in June. We'll have to see how things go. But obviously, I want to ensure that we build up these very strong relations between the Indian government and the UK government, because I think it's good for both our countries. It's important that we reach out and understand the issues and literally listen to what people have to say and then act upon it. That to me has always been a watchword that I've followed all the way through my political career, and I think it's the right way of approaching things. You spoke about me being an outlier. Well, I look forward to I may be an outlier at the moment. I look forward to ensuring that we increase the number of seats where we have a strong Indian presence at the next general election. Not too soon. About 2024 is quite soon enough, but we look forward to increasing the number and increasing the number of people from the Indian community that come forward, members of Parliament. I think it's all important. We have a large number. I mean, we're coming up to May the 6th, the local elections in the UK. A large number of Indian candidates or Indian origin candidates for council and other important positions. And I look forward to as many of those being elected as we possibly can, because that's how we build the representation, by building people's experience and building their capability so they can then go on to the next stage.
Thank you for that, Mr. Blackman. I think that was quite a clear explanation of, and a very touching one of how you felt on being given the Padmashree and your broader vision for India-UK ties. So that's it from me, Ashish.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit. I would actually like to thank Mr. Blackman for appearing on this discussion, for a very candid views on how the Indo-UK relationship is expected to grow and evolve from here, and especially the excitement around the trade deal, which we also are looking forward to getting signed in the coming weeks. There's a lot of anticipation with respect to that, given the current geopolitics. I think it will be great for both the countries. So we really hope that by end of this month, the deal comes into force. So Neil, Phoebe, any comments from your side?
I want to echo Ashish's comments there. This has been a great conversation, and being a British Indian myself, Bob Blackman is very widely respected amongst our community, hugely, especially in areas surrounding London. So I live in Maidenhead, not too far from there, and he's very widely respected amongst our community. And I think it's clear listening from today that there's tremendous potential between the two countries. And it's a really sort of exciting time coming for us. I actually want to end with Bob, a last sort of question. Thoughts on the Commonwealth. We've discussed in great detail today its most important members in India. So what sort of future do you see with the Commonwealth?
Well, obviously, one of the concerns that many of our Commonwealth friends have had is that when we joined the European Union back in the 1970s, which was then an economic community, that we turned our back on the Commonwealth to a large extent. And so now we are trying to reach out for the Commonwealth. I mean, this is a unique organisation in the world. There's been no other empire that has literally granted independence to its various different territories and granted those countries the opportunity to develop by themselves, but then still remains on a friendly basis. And so the Commonwealth brings together people from literally around the world and has an opportunity for trade, aid, for education, for shared learning, and a force for good around the world. It's a force for peace. It's a force for development and understanding. And I think actually by reaching out further across the Commonwealth, and I think the Queen is widely respected throughout the world as head of the Commonwealth, and having others within the royal family reach out and make the Commonwealth once again a very much an included part of what we do, including people on basically, instead of a sort of master-slave type relationship, but literally having as equal partners across the world. I think that's vitally important now as we go forward, and reuniting with all the various different Commonwealth countries. I'm on the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Executive. I'm a Vice Chairman of the All-Party Group for the Commonwealth. I want to see us reach out and be not only firm friends, but being partners on an equal basis and encouraging people to renew that friendship on a proper basis. I think we're managing to do that right now. I think we're getting back to where we should have been in the first place. And I think that's important as we move forward. If I can just end by saying the one lesson we've got to learn from India is, which I admire above all else in India, is the incubation of new business ideas, bringing young people in to develop their new business ideas in a protected environment before they go out and try it in the wider economy. I think we've got to learn that in the UK. It's one of those areas where we can create new businesses in a very efficient and effective way. Some will fail, because they do, but I'd rather they failed in a protected environment where they've got the opportunity to develop the ideas, and if they don't work, well, fine. But it's something that India does extremely well, and we have to learn from, if nothing else, from that relationship with India. And across the world, we can learn from other countries and give people the opportunity to interact and be part of this wonderful organization, the Commonwealth, which is the envy. I mean, it's the envy of everyone else in the world. And we've got to develop it further.
Thank you, Bob. That's all from me. It's been a great conversation. I'll pass it over to Ashish to close.
Thanks, Sunil. Thank you, Mr. Blackman, for talking to us, and hope to host you soon again sometime. And hope you get to visit India to collect your award.
Well, I look forward to it. It's one of those things where you look forward to obviously going and having been granted this wonderful award. And then the frustration of getting all the details in place for the ceremony and so on, only to be told, very sorry, but we've had to cancel it because of the pandemic. And it's obviously frustrating, but the most important thing now is that as we start to unlock, that people remember the rules on washing your hands, keeping a face covering where you're in an enclosed environment in particular, leaving some space around you, getting fresh air, and meeting up. And then hopefully, as with the vaccination program continues, we can reopen the economy and reopen society, and then get back to visiting each other instead of being reliant on technology. Good that it is.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharat Varta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.